Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a deep dive into one of the most enduring and notorious mysteries of the 20th century, the unidentified woman found in Hagleywood. For decades, this case has been totally wrapped up in sensational folklore, wild rumors, and literally ghost stories. But our focus today, we are here to separate fiction from fact. We're going to look strictly at the historical and forensic evidence to get to the truth behind Hagleywood, a story that, honestly, is far more compelling and a lot more tragic than the myths would have you believe. Let's get right into it. Who put Bella in the Wych Elm? Now, you've almost certainly heard this iconic question before. It sounds like a creepy riddle, right? Or maybe some twisted nursery rhyme. And honestly, it's the main reason this case has survived in the public imagination for over 80 years. But while the phrase itself is super famous, the real story we're uncovering today isn't a riddle at all. It's actually a profound story about really competent police work, the intense limitations of wartime, and ultimately a devastating systemic failure. So the whole thing begins with an incredibly eerie, but very, very real discovery. Picture this. It's April 1943, World War II is absolutely raging across Europe, and four local boys are just wandering through Hagleywood in Worcestershire. They were looking for birds' nests to find some eggs, which was a super common thing to do during wartime rationing. Well, one of the boys peered into the tight, hollow trunk of a wych elm tree and saw what he initially thought was an animal skull. But, spoiler alert, it wasn't. It was human. The police were immediately called in, and what they pulled from that narrow tree trunk was a near-complete skeleton, some fragments of clothing, a single shoe, and a cheap, rolled gold wedding ring. Oh, and just outside the tree, scattered on the ground, they found a severed hand. Which brings us to Section 1, the forensic facts. It's so easy for a discovery like that to just immediately spiral into legend. But if we strip away the romance of the mystery, the initial police work in 1943 was actually grounded in rigorous scientific reality. Professor James Webster, he was a forensic pathologist at the time, examined the remains and built a really specific medical profile using the very best tools of the era. This wasn't some woodland ghost. This was a real woman. Webster determined she was around 35 to 40 years old, petite, just about 5 feet tall, and she had given birth to at least one child. Based on his exam, she'd been dead for roughly 18 months, which places her death right around October 1941. They also found a wad of taffeta cloth lodged deep in her mouth, pointing directly to asphyxiation. And here's a crucial detail. Because that hollow tree trunk was incredibly tight, Professor Webster figured out she had to have been stuffed inside before rigor mortis set in, meaning she was almost certainly murdered right there at the tree or at least very close to it. And the sheer scale of the police effort here was absolutely massive. Armed with Professor Webster's profile and the fact that the victim had these very distinctive, irregular teeth, investigators didn't just sit on their hands. No, they diligently cross-checked over 3,000 missing person files. 3,000! They even circulated her unique dental records nationally through dental journals. I mean, this was a genuine, sweeping investigative effort. So why on earth did it fail? Well, it failed because of the era. The fragmented, completely overwhelmed wartime infrastructure of 1943 simply couldn't close the loop on a transient or displaced population. Moving right along to Section 2, birth of the graffiti. Now, as we all know, human nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. When the official investigation hit a brick wall and couldn't identify the body, it created this massive informational void, and the public very quickly stepped right in to fill it. Just take a look at the spacing on this timeline. We've got the estimated time of death in October 1941, the grim discovery in April 1943, but the name Bella, that doesn't even enter the picture until December 1944. That is more than a year and a half after the body was found. That's exactly when chalk graffiti reading, "Who put Bella down the Wych Elm?" first appeared on a wall in Birmingham. And while that graffiti definitely provided a catchy, tantalizing riddle for the public to chew on, it was fundamentally disastrous for the memory of the victim. The name Bella was literally just an unverified lead, but the public just accepted it as undeniable fact. This moment right here marks the exact turning point where local folklore began to permanently overtake the factual forensic investigation. The real, unidentified woman started to fade away, tragically replaced by a mythic character. Let's dive into Section 3, Witches, Spies, and Rumors. So, with the victim now officially a legend, the theories explaining her death became, well, increasingly unhinged. To truly understand this case, we have to systematically debunk these rumors, and let's start with the occult. An anthropologist named Margaret Murray popularized this wild theory that the victim was part of a ritualistic witchcraft execution. Remember that severed hand found outside the tree? Murray claimed it was a hand of glory, which is this dark magical artifact used by burglars in folklore. But there is a massive problem with this idea, a total lack of physical evidence. A severed hand scattered outside a shallow natural grave is entirely consistent with woodland animals, like foxes, just disturbing the site. There was absolutely zero documented evidence of any ritualistic practice happening here. Fortunately for us, the everyday public had a bit more common sense. While experts were spinning these elaborate tales of black magic, one Midlands reader sent a postcard to a journalist. They pasted a newspaper clipping of Margaret Murray's witchcraft theory right onto it, and at the bottom, written in a very firm, determined hand, were just 2 words: utter rot. I mean, it's just a brilliant historical reminder that even back then, people saw right through the sensationalism. But hey, if witches were out, spies were definitely in. Enter the most durable myth of all, the espionage theory. Jump ahead to 1953, and a woman named Una Mossop comes forward with this spectacular, thriller-like story. She claimed her late ex-husband, Jack Mossop, alongside this mysterious Dutchman, had killed a German spy named Clara Bauerle, who had supposedly parachuted into the Midlands. Una claimed Jack actually confessed to her that they stuffed the woman into the hollow tree. And for decades, guys, this spiraling drama was considered the absolute most viable solution to the whole mystery. But, as always, this is exactly why we must return to the original source evidence. The physical mismatch here is just undeniable. Our victim, Bella, was precisely measured at 5 feet tall and died around October 1941. Clara Bauerle, the alleged spy, well, she was a cabaret singer who stood at towering 5 feet 10 inches tall, almost a foot taller. Furthermore, in 2016, a researcher actually discovered Clara Bauerle's official death certificate. Turns out she didn't die in an English wood at all. She died in a Berlin hospital in December 1942. So just like that, the Clara Bauerle espionage theory is completely dismantled by basic forensic facts. Okay, so what about Jack Mossop, the man supposedly haunted by his role in this gruesome murder? The truth here is just, it's incredibly sad. Jack wasn't some master assassin, he was actually a severely unwell young man. He'd suffered repeated head injuries as a test pilot, which unfortunately led to chronic drinking, severe mood swings, and terrifying hallucinations, including, yes, a recurring nightmare of a woman leering at him from a tree. He was eventually admitted to Stafford Mental Hospital, where he tragically died in 1942 at just 29 years old. And contrary to these modern internet rumors of a sinister poisoning or overdose, his official death certificate lists the cause as cerebral softening and myocardial degeneration. Basically, devastating physical ailments exacerbated by his injuries and alcoholism. So his story is one of tragic mental decline, not some international spy thriller. And that brings us to Section 4, Lost Twice by the System. With all the myths totally debunked, we are left with the core tragedy of this explainer, which is a devastating custodial failure. Prepare yourself for this one because after the initial investigation, the victim's remains were reportedly held in a Birmingham Police Black Museum collection. And then, sometime in the late 1960s or early 1970s, they just vanished. Literally, inexplicably lost. Now, we mentioned earlier that the failure to identify her in 1943 was a totally understandable consequence of a strained wartime infrastructure. But losing her actual physical remains decades later during peacetime, that was entirely preventable. It was a basic, absolutely catastrophic failure of evidence preservation. And the consequence of this lapse is absolute. Because the justice system literally let go of her remains, the door to modern forensic science is permanently closed. Recent BBC investigations confirmed this grim reality. Without the bones, there is zero genetic material to extract. We have incredible DNA technology today, right? Tech that regularly solves cold cases just like this one. But it is entirely useless here. Modern science is blocked from ever giving this woman her true name back. Which leaves us with this final lingering thought. What actually happens to the victims when the system loses the evidence, leaving only a legend behind? You see, this case isn't just some spooky mystery about a hollow tree. It's a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of our justice system. Think about it. A real, living woman with a history and a name was erased twice. First, by the person who violently took her life, and second, by the very institutions that were built to protect her memory and seek her justice. When we finally strip away the witches and the spies, we are left with a real person, waiting in the dark, lost twice by the record.